I'm privileged to have been invited to the private grounds of this estate in East Lothian. I'm at Keith Marischal, Keith Marshal, that's the correct pronunciation. I'm going to look at an old, ruined, medieval chapel, and in particular, a medieval grave, the grave of a crusading knight, and possibly the grave of a knight who played a very prominent role with a highly privileged and honoured task in the service of King Robert the Bruce. Behind me is the modern day Keith Marischal house, pronounced Marshal, Keith Marshal. In 1293, one of the most famous of the Keith family, Sir Robert Keith, a man who Robert the Bruce had complete confidence in and held him in high regard. Robert Keith was, after being made Marshal of Scotland, he was responsible for maintaining order in courts, in Parliament, and he was a man of prominent position, and that position would be passed down through generation of Marshals in Scotland. These lands, originally in 1159, this estate went to one Hervey de Keith, and he built a chapel here. Now, although Robert Keith is probably the most well-known out of the times relating to Robert the Bruce, there's another Keith that I'm really interested in. Now, a chapel was built here, and this dilapidated old place on this lovely estate, which is succumbing to age, to the territory of badgers, and is falling apart, may hold a very ancient, not secret, but something that's not so well known, but which plays a very active part in the story of King Robert the Bruce. You can certainly tell with walking the ground here that there are active badger colonies, and there are holes and tunnels here all under this. But this magnificent ancient church, yes, has been modified through the years, but this ancient place, 13th, 12th century, is something to behold, tucked away on this private estate. And you can just see what the ravages of time have done to this. Look at this wall. Look at how this wall is leaning over. It's cracked there from the foundation. I'm having to watch I don't step into badger holes here. But look at this marvellous old relic, standing still in the modern day, in time. But some of the damage here, as you can see, is quite substantial. But nevertheless, there's something beautiful and graceful about an old ruin. And this dates right back to the earliest time when the Keith family were here. Now the Keiths had territory in different parts of Scotland, in this wonderful estate, and I'm going to take you through this estate and walk down where the Keith memories lie, where they've left their mark. But one thing that's really intriguing me here, and it's not so easy to find, you can look in the Canmore site and it explains it as being leaning against, which I don't think it is anymore, the northwest wall of the church, is a medieval grave slab. The story of this film today centres around that grave slab and what it could possibly be. This is known as Keith Church or Keith Kirk. But they would have practiced here in olden times, back in the days of those great knights. And that great name of Keith, which would be associated with prominent positions in the government under King Robert the Bruce. My interest in this area, there is a medieval grave slab in there, and many, including some of the Keith family, now this is an assumption rather than a definite, think that it could be the grave of a certain William Keith of Galston. Galston being in Ayrshire. Now, what does William Keith of Galston have to do with King Robert the Bruce? Now, we have to jump forward now to 1329 and the death of King Robert the Bruce. Now, early in 1330, William Keith was one of the privileged and honoured party to accompany James, the good Sir James Douglas, or the Black Douglas, depending where you come from, with the heart of Robert the Bruce to the Holy Land to present it in front of the Holy Sepulchre. Now, on their way, they sailed from Montrose to Sluis in Flanders. From Flanders, they went to Seville. They sailed to Seville, where they met King Alfonso, who was campaigning against the Moors in Granada at the time, and they pledged their support there. Now, among that party were Henry and John Sinclair, the Logan brothers, Kenneth Moore, I think it was. So there was quite a few of them, but William Keith was one of them. Now, while King Alfonso was laying siege to the Castle of the Stars, Douglas and his men were tasked with protecting a river. It was the only source of fresh water for the besiegers. And well, the Moor party split in two, and one of the sides attacked Douglas, his men, and Sinclair got isolated from the fighting, and Douglas and his men went in to rescue him and save him, and Douglas, amongst others, were slain in that battle in August 1330. But William Keith survived, and he was one of the party that survived because he did not take part in the combat. The thinking about that is that he had a broken arm. But he, as a survivor, Simon Locker the Knight was also a survivor, would bring back the remains, the bones and the heart of James Douglas, that great Scottish warrior, and with the heart of Robert the Bruce. Douglas, of course, would be interred at St Bride's in Douglas, and Bruce's heart would be interred at Melrose Abbey. But that's where William Keith really walks into the history books, and many think that that's his grave over there within this old church. Now, some question it, and some say, okay, if William Keith died, why wouldn't he be buried in his own lands, his own estate in Galston in Ayrshire? Or was he buried here because it was the more prominent home to the Keith family? We'll never know, but let's go take a look at that slab. As I say, it's an assumption more than a definite, but it's a possibility. Rummaging through this old place is one to be taken with care and to be meticulous. Now, I thought originally, whoops, stepping into a badger hole here. My goodness me, that just sinks beneath the feet there. I thought originally that this would be the medieval stone, and I cleared some of it away. Look at the badger holes in here. Quite amazing. And I cleared some of it away, but it doesn't match the description of what I'm looking for. The medieval gravestone. Also thought it could be this here, but this looks like it fell out of there, and that is not common with how medieval practice. Medieval practices were usually slabs that were laid on the ground. And as we go into this area here, many of you may think it's a shame, and in some ways it is, to see an old dilapidated ruin like this finally go into serious decay. But there's something magical and beautiful about a ruin as well. We have so many places in care, and it's great to go and visit them, and yes, they're cleaned up and they're preserved, but there's also something beautiful about finding a place that is lost in time, not very well known, but has a great backstory, and it makes visiting these places a very private affair and a very memorable one. Now, this medieval grave slab is described as 4 foot in length, and what it described years ago, I forget the year, but there was in the centre an incised sword, so an engraved sword 3 foot long, and it had a hilt and a pommel. And although this, it says it was leaning against the north-west wall, which was here, and although this does not look much, and the inscription is long gone. There is something there. It's just very difficult to make out. But I believe this is it. This is it. Whatever was inscribed there on the stone from all that long time ago is certainly now gone. Is this the grave? It's certainly the grave of a medieval time period. Is it the grave of the Crusader, William Keith? If not, who is it? He would have been a prominent Keith to have been buried here. There is something there, and it is extremely difficult to decipher or make out in any way. But there's something there that fits. Down here. What way around it is, I really don't know. But talking about an old stone, lost in time, that may be the last resting place of William de Keith. Just walking through these Keith lands, these ancient ancestral lands, it's quite an experience actually. This is a beautiful valley, and all around the Keiths have left their mark. This is a Keith water right behind me. We're in Keith Glen. There's Keith View, Keith Bridge. So many places here that belonged in his beautiful ancestral estate, this place. Going back to William Keith of Galston, he had quite a coloured career during the Scottish Wars of Independence. William Keith commanded troops under James Douglas in 1318 at the capture of Berwick. What an experience that would have been, capturing Berwick and its castle. He was also commander at Berwick in the year 1333 when the Scots suffered a great defeat at nearby Halidon Hill. And William Keith, after successfully returning with the remains of Douglas and Bruce, would be killed in action in the year 1337 at the siege of Stirling. Although it's great to visit known landmarks like castles and churches and what have you, to me there's nothing better than walking through ancient lands. I mean, here I've no doubt that the knights and the family of the Keiths and the guests that they had, and I'm sure that they would have had royalty, including King Robert the Bruce at the time. Bruce had such confidence in the Keiths that they were very close to him. But to walk here where they would have walked themselves, they would have enjoyed the beautiful day, rode with their horses, brought their loved ones, and spent intimate moments here. To walk in a place where no one really goes. And I'm constantly keeping an eye out because I haven't seen any cows or bulls, but there is a small set of prints here, and I've been chased by a bull before, and I've had a few standoff with cows, so you have to take care. I wouldn't recommend it, but you have to take care when you're walking these types of landscape. But this is just beautiful to go through this ancient place and savour and sample the Keith territory. All is quiet now, away from the country B roads that surround this place, and it's an extension of quite a vast estate that the Keiths held, and they did have colourful careers. As mentioned, Robert Keith as Marshal, beginning a hereditary title, seeing action with Bruce, journeys ups and downs, journeys, campaigns, and ultimately at the Battle of Bannockburn, the Bruce decisively won. And there's also some myths around the Keiths, or what I believe are myths, all relating to John Barber's account, but they were certainly there, and they certainly fought side by side with Robert the Bruce there. But William Keith, the more I've looked into him, is quite an intriguing character. And when I read about the colourful career that he had, and then finally losing his life, killed in action at the siege of Stirling, it's like Douglas and many other knights. You know, it's like the old saying, living by the sword and dying by the sword, and living that way of life. You're very fortunate if you live out a life and you're not killed in action. But so many of them were, including Douglas, of course, who Keith and Douglas seem to have been quite close. Douglas as more of a head commander, and Keith commanding troops under him. They seem to have been quite close. So along with that party that took that fateful journey with James Douglas, William Keith, Henry and John Sinclair, Robert Mingus, the Logan brothers, and Kenneth Moir. I don't think I've missed many out. If I have, what a journey and experience that would have been, and also what a lot of thought on reflection that William Keith would have had coming back with the heart of his king and the heart of his commander, and I assume great friend Douglas. Bruce's heart would never reach the Holy Land, but the crusade, the attempt of it was made, and people died in his service trying to fulfill his final wish. But these are the ancestral lands of the very noble Keith family. It's a fascinating walk through these old woods of the Marischal estate. I've already scared off a few deer and flushed a few pheasants myself. One story that I find quite intriguing, and I'd be sure that William Keith, along with the rest of that party, would be present with Douglas, is that There was an English knight who'd heard of Douglas. Of course he would have heard of him. Douglas was a living legend in Scottish and English history. But he'd heard of this great Scottish warrior, and he was eager to meet him at King Alfonso's court. So when they met, the English knight expressed his astonishment in how clean, unmarked his face was, without scar. And Douglas is reported to have retorted that my hands were too skillful to let anyone close enough to harm my face. And I can imagine Douglas saying that with a glint and twinkle in his eye. Possibly a wink between the two of them. But how true it was, and it's only real description that we get to the features of James Douglas. Of course, little did he or anyone else know that this great warrior's days were certainly numbered. This has been a fascinating video to make, and this equally, this ancient medieval slab here, I did come out here with the owners of the property, and we took a look around this. It really is, to anyone else, it's just an old stone, unless you know what you're looking for. Is William Keith here, that knight who had such a beautiful history with Robert the Bruce? Does he lie beneath here? Who knows? Who knows? As I said before, it's a supposition, but it's a very intriguing thought to think that he might be here. It's certainly a crusader's grave, and you can see the old outline of a sword on this grave. And it's certainly someone, who is, who was a prominent knight in their time, and this stone has been dated to that time. So fascinating here, but also even walking through these lands, through this estate, because Robert Keith and other Keiths were so close and trusted people to Robert the Bruce. I've got no doubt, it's, again, this is just my thoughts, it's just my opinion, but because they were so close, I've got no doubt that Robert the Bruce visited the Keiths at this estate and walked around these estates, and more than likely, if he did, it's highly possible that he came into this chapel as well. Bruce being a pious man in those pious times, and that Bruce worshipped here and walked the grounds here with the Keith. This has been a fascinating story to delve into. You really are getting into the undergrowth. This place gets so overgrown. This is April, and already the greenery and the weeds and the nettles are starting to show, but this old slab here from such a long time ago, 1337, William Keith of Galston was killed in action at the siege of Stirling, and he may lie beneath here. It's a great story. It's a story that's predominantly it's rooted firmly in truth. We just don't know his final resting place. Could this be it? Is this the forgotten or lost grave of that great crusading knight who went with that fateful party to Spain, and mostly it ended in death for most of them, but William Keith returned with the remains of two of our greatest heroes. If you've liked this video, please comment, share, subscribe. Thank you for walking in the footsteps with me.